I'm Justin. I am no longer in a job as of 3 hours ago, and my pronouns are he and they.
I'm Jay. I'm a cataloging librarian still, and my pronouns are he, him.
And we have guests. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Abby Emerson. I'm an educator here in New York.
And I'm Hal. I am a librarian between jobs also, and pronouns are he, here.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, Hal. Abby, it's great to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you all. Thanks for having me.
And we are currently staggering episodes, so this won't come out for a couple weeks. But we did have Emily Draminsky on, and as soon as I mentioned we were talking with you this week, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to talk to you about NYC Plan real quick. Make sure you mention." So we're going to properly have gassed you up before this episode comes out.
Great.
For people who aren't aware what NYC Plan is, could you let us know what it is and how it got started?
So basically, when Eric Adams was mayor, there was the budget cycle of 24 when Eric Adams cut $58 million from the library budgets of the three New York public libraries, Brooklyn, Queens, and NYPL. And every year there is a budget cycle. And so the cuts that year really just highlighted something about the broader back and forth where the mayor does a preliminary budget that underestimates by a lot what every city service needs to run. And this really started with Bloomberg during the recession, though maybe a little, I don't know, before Bloomberg, I'm not sure what was going on, but during the Bloomberg administration, the libraries had huge cuts. And ever since then, even good mayors for libraries have given preliminary budgets, which massively cut something from the library budgets, often from parks too. And then there's this haggling that has to happen by city council members to get it back up. And Eric Adams just did a more extreme version of what de Blasio did as well, which is like every budget cycle, they talk about, there's just so much deficit or that we need so much austerity that we can't afford to run the library systems. And the effect of this is often taken to be nothing because in the end, the budget gets restored in the final adopted budget. So the final adopted budget comes out in June. And after that, libraries can actually plan with the money they really have for the rest of the year. But it would be nice if there was year-to-year funding that you could count on, because what always happens is during those months of budget negotiations, the libraries usually do a hiring freeze or a hiring slow way down. The libraries can't really make any plans for capital investment for the next year until the budget thing gets sorted out. And there's a lot of, up in the airness around programs, around long-term planning, around grants, et cetera. So during the Eric Adams cuts, there was this huge pause in everything. There was a reduction in books acquired. The after-school program at NYPL where I was at was up in the air in terms of they had planned an expansion of it, but were they even going to be able to keep doing it? And then we saw on the shelves that there were fewer new books for kids. The actual tangible impact was happening because we didn't have the money to do it because it was being negotiated. So in that atmosphere, a bunch of people got together and were like, okay, the librarians have Urban Librarians Unite to advocate for library budgets, but there also probably needs to be a kind of joint organization of patrons and library workers to advocate for a continued year-to-year funding for the New York libraries. And so Mariame Kaba was one of the first people to get involved. Dylan helped set up this call, talked a lot about city budgets in early meetings. And my understanding is right now it's like a coalition of library workers, library patrons, educators, people who care about that funding being a stable percentage of the city budget rather than something that can fluctuate erratically year to year. And so they pressured really hard to try to get the mayoral candidates last year to all promise to 0.5% of the city budget for libraries. And that was a number based on the fact that currently library budgets have sat around somewhere around 0.4% of the city budget. And it's just never enough to catch up with capital planning stuff. So building repairs that have been years and years out of date or whatever. It's not enough. So 0.5% might be enough. And if it was that every year, then people could plan. And it would also be tied to inflation. Abby, if you have anything else you want to add to that.
No, I mean, I think that's really good background, and that's kind of where it, came in. And so now we're a group that, is our main ask at this point is that 0.5% that Hal mentioned. And, we're meetings to figure out strategy and talk about, okay, who do we target? Okay, so the mayor, we got to talk to that guy. Okay, the city council, we got to talk to those folks. And so we're kind of working, as we said, to push on the different levers that are available to us. And what Hal mentioned, that I think, I'm not a library worker, I'm an educator. But so in the spaces of schools and education, the administrators might not always listen to teachers because, yada, yada. But if parents show up, right, and then that's when they're going to start to listen. And so that's kind of some of the approach that Plan takes, where it's like, okay, maybe they're not going to listen to library workers, the administration, but maybe the folks that are kind of in charge of the funding, either at, branch level or higher up, maybe they will listen if patrons are asking for more, complaining, and, putting their neck out there for it.
Yeah. And when you have like patrons echoing your demands, right? Like it's easy for, I think, for them to ignore like a union calling for 0.5%. But if, the knitting circle shows up and says, 0.5% for the library budget, right? Because I think Mariame Kaba said like she was talking to her neighbor cornered her the other day and was like, I'm getting all my friends on emailing City Hall about the 0.5%. And Mariame was like, we're winning this. This is it. We've got people.
I think libraries are very popular when you talk to people about them. I think like the moment where we learned that the preliminary budget didn't have the funding that Zoran Mamdani and the other mayoral candidates had all committed to, which was 0.5%, there was a moment of kind of shock and confusion, but it's like, okay, we're doing this budget advocacy thing, and at least there is this sort of partnership already in place. So the 21st, there was like a meeting at Make the Road New York where there was several presentations by the union leadership for Brooklyn and Queens libraries, and then a discussion of like what the budget system is and who to call and who to talk to, and then like a Know Your Rights training wrapped in there as well. And it was very organized. And I think that the more people talk to their neighbors and the more people talk to people at their local, storytime circles or whatever programs they're using at the library, people care about the library because it's a point where sort of the city infrastructure touches their lives. Anyone who uses the library enjoys it. And so they want to make sure that there's still funding.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Because it's like, what sort of in y'all's advocacy and trying to speak more to like non-library workers, but like people who would care? Because so often, I mean, I'm in public libraries now, but I used to be in academic libraries, and famously, faculty don't give a shit about the library workers or the librarians. They care more about their journals. They're like, well, fire that person. I care more about you paying for this journal that only I care about, right? And so I get very jaded. I'm like, people don't actually care about librarians and library workers. They care about the services that they want. And so I'm always very focused on like, we have to make sure that, if we're going to disrupt services, that there's those relationships built, and so anger can be directed where it's supposed to be. So I'm wondering like what sort of like, how are you translating these numbers? Because there's the capital projects thing, and like you mentioned, like the children's book, but what sort of like other sort of tangible ways are you translating these budget numbers to like impact on services to non-library people to get them on our side?
One thing I can say, I don't know if this directly answers your question, but maybe it does in a more roundabout way, is so as Hal mentioned, we had our third People's Assembly last weekend. So we had one
October
in
one.
Oh, fun. Nice. Great. Yeah. So we had a Brooklyn one last May. We had the Manhattan one in October, and then we had Queens last week. And one thing that we've done at all of these, in addition to sharing information about how libraries are funded and whatnot, is we've structured it so that there's small group time for folks to share what's going on in your branches. How are you experiencing this? And, what do you enjoy about your libraries? What do you wish you could get more of out of your libraries? And so from those conversations that we've had with people, both internally in NYC Plan and externally, I think that was actually a growing point for us to learn that the staffing and the library workers' experience, I think originally that was maybe not as a priority for us, but through those conversations, I think that we identified that as kind of like the main, sticking point in some ways. And at one point, I don't know if we're really still using this as much, but we talked about the 3 Ps when it came to funding. The first P being people, so the workers and whatnot. The second P being place. So that was around the buildings, right? And like making sure, as you said, the capital budgets and whatnot to fix up these Carnegie buildings that are starting to age, right? And then the third P being programming. And I think for patrons, they tend to think of maybe programming first, but we've sort of really made sure that those other Ps, the people and the place, are really central to what we're advocating for as well.
Yeah. And it's cool to go into a really big meeting and see workers' rights and sort of foregrounded and then overlapping with patron interests. So like libraries as cooling centers during the summer required the library to be air conditioned. And if the library has broken HVACs, the library will not be air conditioned. And that affects both the workers and the people using the library in a really significant way in a city that has too few pools to cool down in, too few parks to cool down in, and a whole lot of people whose ACs also break in the summer. And I think that as, everyone's power grid gets overloaded more and more, I think having energy efficient, cool libraries in the summer is going to be more important to people. And I think that talking about it in settings where both the workers and the patrons using the library are present manages to kind of sidestep a problem that I've seen in advocacy before, where like patrons will be like, we would love libraries 7 days a week. And then all the unions are like, okay, well, we really got to talk about what that would require.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. I think that was something that last year when some of us were doing testimony as patrons, that was something we were like, we tossed in our testimony. But then through these conversations, we were like, oh, well, maybe strategically that is not, sure, maybe that could be part of the argument of why they need funding, but that's not necessarily the priority.
Right.
When you hear that there are library workers who haven't been paid properly in a long time, or library workers who, are just being so underpaid. Coming from education, I'm familiar with that struggle.
Yeah, and I think maybe last time you were on Hal, I asked how this was affecting NYPL, but like I can't imagine that like Baker and Taylor going under has like I'm sure that's probably put like a lot of strain on your technical services, like staff across the the
became more
NYC
complicated.
libraries.
Yeah. And I also, I part of the reason that I'm here talking frankly is because I quit my job at NYPL and I'm seeking work. So I don't know exactly what's happening at NYPL right now. But yes, Baker and Taylor, like ordering complications, things that affect book publishing broadly affect collections development as well.
Yeah, it's a huge strain on my department right now, as now like Ingram can't do shelf, like we're not set up for Ingram to do full cataloging for us like Baker and Taylor could. And yet now there's like, oh no, it's totally not a hiring freeze, wink. Like then who the fuck is supposed to do all these books,
Tea I can spill about NYPL is that the last I checked in, they had like one person doing all Chinese cataloging for NYPL. And I know that my coworker who spoke Korean did a lot of acquisition in Korean for the system, even though that was not her job title, because she was one of the only staff anywhere in NYPL who spoke Korean and was knowledgeable about children's books. So that kind of like job creep and just like not filling a title that's open because they can save money by not, and just asking one person to do more people's jobs in cataloging, that ends up being...
I do all of the Arabic cataloging where I work, That's not my job. That's...
I'm interested when you're in these big meetings with like patrons, how, and the discussion goes from like services 7 days a week to other things, how like I'm interested in like place. So how have like patrons been expressing as part of NYC Plan their thoughts about place, right? Because I'm really interested in this. Like, I think last week I think Emily mentioned like this new library was built at all these service points, and the library was obsessed with staffing all the service points by breaking all their full-time jobs into part-time jobs to get the flexibility needed to cover all these new fancy service points. even though they could have just not staffed the service points and had people get full-time jobs with benefits. So like, how are people talking about like place and how they think about the library as a place? I'm interested.
I think that I think that when there have been conversations either at our assemblies or when folks have, been testifying, it seems like there is a real appreciation for not just, and I think that's been an important kind of message. A sub message we've tried to push is that libraries are not just books, and really trying to foreground their place as one of commons, right? As one of that is a free, accessible space, right? That everyone has the right to exist in, regardless of what their deal is. And it feels like there's a real appreciation for that. And when people do kind of speak about their libraries, it goes well beyond the services or the programming, but really also just like its existence and its place as like a society centerpiece, if you will.
Yeah. One thing that came up on the 21st was that there was a library manager and steward for the union in Queens who was asked about the number of staff that she would consider fully staffed for her library. And so she started talking about how it varies based on service points and number of floors and whether you can see other staff and whether it's safe. And so she can't give an exact number off the top of her head, but she can say that there are libraries with 3 floors that management says can be run with 2 staff. And that can't be done because you can't staff simultaneously all of the floors at once. And then ideally, you would have 2 people on each floor. And then ideally, you would have some programs sometimes. So you would have, maybe 12 to 15 people for a 3-floor branch instead of 7 people for a 3-floor branch. And that's not the kind of estimation that has been really changed in a long time. I think there were staff cuts back during the recession, and literally like the former staffing levels have never been restored for a lot of local community branches because people have figured out how to run them with less people, even though that's a worse level of service. It leads to people who are irritated and distracted because they're trying to do 5 things at once. And then that leads to a worse patron experience too. But I think that curiosity about place was interesting. And also a fun thing that was at the 21st, at the People's Forum for Rally for Libraries, was there was a big slideshow of photos of like all of the different public libraries throughout New York. And someone had gone around and photographed the inside and outside of a whole bunch of different community branches of libraries, and it was playing the whole time. And I thought that was a great thing to be happening on the wall, because you could see just like flashing by, just like one at a time, the interiors of like 200 different libraries and like all of the different ways that they look and all the different like little bulletin boards of kids art and stuff that was going on. And I think that it also kind of highlighted how old a lot of these branches were, because the ones that are not Carnegie libraries are usually from the 60s. And so they're also probably, a little bit dated in terms of the linoleum and the stuff on the ceiling and stuff. I think that photo series was really effective at highlighting place.
Yeah, that I just looked it up. That it was a photographer who passed away in 2024, and her name is Elizabeth Felicella. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I believe Dylan said her partner gave permission for us to, share these photos. And I think that Dylan curated it so that at the Queens Public Assembly, it was just Queens branch photos, and at the Manhattan Assembly, it was just Manhattan photos, and et cetera. And so, but I do think in terms of the idea of place, I think one thing that has been helpful for patrons to kind of make sense of what that means, right? And what, in terms of, okay, there's not a budget to help support the space, is kind of like you said, of like the AC not working or whatever, or if the elevator's broken down, or if it's closed, the branch near me was closed for 3 weeks for HVAC repairs because and they, and before that, they would close during the winter and the summer if it was extreme, one way or the other. And so kind of seeing those interruptions in like understanding the connection between, okay, if they don't have the funding, then they can't pay for the, capital development repairs. And then this is what happens. And then I don't get to go to the library and pick up my book this week or whatever it is. Kind of seeing that flow, I think is helpful for people to make sense of place in a new way.
Yeah, I mean, that's really atrocious staffing for like a 3-floor building to run by 2 people, because that's basically just one person to watch the door who can never go to the bathroom, and then another person to manage the rest of the building. Where I just worked, we had a 2-floor library and we could close with 2 people, one person didn't let new people in, the other one went and closed, but like that's it. Otherwise, you were very tied to the desk. We would only staff that low during spring break when no one was here. The strategy that like NYC Plan's been using, how have you felt like it's been effective or ineffective at like getting its messaging out to people? Because I imagine a lot of people who aren't in New York City want to look to this and say like, hey, this sounds like it's been really good at getting a consistent message out. Like that sounds like it's been really impressively done, like getting the 0.5% thing out. But what do you think is like some lessons that other, like particularly cities probably could be taking from NYC Plan's organizing?
I think strategically, yeah, there was definitely discussion and some, figuring out alignment around the 0.5% of, is that what we want to ask for or not? I think that both in terms of strategically, that made sense, but also in terms of stickiness, like 0.5, it's like a number that can stick in people's heads, as opposed to if we were to say it's this number, right? Like 523 million or whatever it is, that number is going to change based on, the year and whatnot. And so we're like, okay, if we can just stick to this point, I think that will help resonate with people. What brings me a lot of hope about this is that last year when we were asking for this, demanding this 0.5%, we were more aggressive than the libraries themselves. When the budget process was happening last year, the library heads, because of course they're in a political position where they need to say, oh, thank you so much, city council, and thank you so much to the mayor. They have to kind of do that sort of work. So they couldn't, they were, they're being strategic around their position. And so we felt we were in a position to be a little bit more aggressive, if you will. And so in the fall, when some of us from Plan were meeting with our city council folks or city council staff, a question that some of us got was, oh, well, how do the libraries feel about this? Like, are they asking for 0.5%? And at that point in time, we said, well, no, actually, they're not, but we are. And we're trying to kind of support in that way. But then last week at the hearing, all of the library heads, I believe it was all three, definitely a couple of them mentioned it, said 0.5%, all three of them. And to me, that was like great because
Y'all
I
got
felt
management on your side?
yeah, basically. I was like,
Damn.
amazing. And I don't know if it's necessarily that it went from us to them or if it went from us to Zoran, because Zoran, that he added that to his campaign last year when we were pushing on him. And so
he was
added
saying
that.
it a lot. He was
And
saying it a lot.
yes, he was saying it. So it might have gone to him and then he was saying it. And then they said, okay, now we can say that too. But either way, that did feel like hearing that was really okay. That made me feel like, okay, we're making progress because now they're pushing the way we want them to push.
Yeah, that makes me so like y'all are in this position where because you're not directly affiliated with either the library or its unions, like you're a separate entity, you can kind of you can be in a different sort of position politically and strategically than maybe the library management or the unions can put themselves in. But I'm curious, how has the relationship been with either union representatives or if you have met with library management at all? Like what has it been like having those discussions with those groups?
So last year, or wait, when was this? Yeah, early 2025, when the mayoral elections were kicking off, the NYC Plan group wrote to all the mayoral candidates, and at the same time, people were sort of bringing the messaging into the union meetings of like
Mhm.
there is a new library advocacy group, and they are pushing for this number, and we have now gotten the mayoral candidates to say this number. Isn't that fantastic? And so I'm not sure. I'm not sure about Deborah Allman, the president of 1930, because sometimes she answers emails and sometimes she doesn't from long experience in 1930. But other people on the executive board of 1930 are like very down with the messaging from NYC Plan about increased funding, consistent funding. And Deborah is too when she weighs in on it. I think that she's less involved than it seems like the Brooklyn and Queens unions are, from my impression. But I think that everyone hears, 0.5% consistent funding and is like, oh, that would be great if that happened. And I think, however it has gotten to management, it has gotten there via sort of going directly to political candidates and being like, I want you to have this as part of your platform. And then the political candidates respond, I think, to an organized seeming group of citizens advocating for a cause that seems like a popular and easy cause. And that's sort of where we've gotten now, which is like, now we're in a silly budget cycle again, where the preliminary budget undercut, but the city council seems to be on the library's side. And I think the city council has probably internalized that number. We'll see what they do with their response to the preliminary budget and where they pull from for that. We can cross our fingers that a state income tax goes through and then we have far more money to work with and then everything works out. But regardless, I think the city council members will figure out how to pull more money towards the libraries and parks because of these commitments and these fights. Because it was also like the 1% for parks fight was also happening simultaneously to NYC Plan. So they kind of went together. It was 1% for parks, 0.5% for libraries, with this idea of building like a usable commons for everyone in the city that is open to everyone, that improves life for everyone, that lowers crime, that helps people go to the bathroom, that like is a net benefit for the entire city. And I think that partly the energy of this last campaign cycle put those things a little bit more out there. I don't know if every city is going to have a really rambunctious mayoral election going on where that can come to the fore, but there might be other strategies. Abby, do you want to talk about like strategies that you have used to like reach out to people in your communities or people around you to talk about stuff?
Sure. I mean, I've definitely done, some classic tabling in, a few places. Although it's been interesting, I tried to table outside the branch near me just so, and they said no. They said I was not allowed to, even though I was like, well, I'm just outside. I can like make myself, a little bit away and clear that I'm not like with you. But I was not allowed to do that. But I tabled at a place, like a corner near my kid's school where like I know a lot of people, I knew a lot of people would stop and talk to me. And I think that was, it's a busy corner. And so I was there at like 8 a.m. at drop off and whatnot. So I've tried to just, have conversations with anyone that would frankly listen. And I'm sure all my friends are really sick of my social media because I'm just always posting about, this campaign and what we're working on. But I also then have done, beyond just kind of blanket invitations and blanket outreach and whatever, some targeted stuff to say, oh, I think you might be interested in this, or, you seem kind of aligned with this type of thing. And so a few folks have kind of joined the group or said, I want to, I'm going to get there. No, I'm not ready yet. I don't have the bandwidth yet. But, and so that's kind of just how I've been about it. But kind of going back to a question that you had asked earlier about kind of almost like strategies or things that could help folks in other cities or other locations around their kind of advocacy with libraries. So as of right now, as Hal was saying, so we have 6 city council members who have, quote, agreed to our demand. Whether that translates into actually getting 0.5%, we will see. And we did have one person who actually said no. They said, they didn't just not respond. They said, I do not support 0.5%, which was, a choice.
At least they said it.
Yeah. I mean, I looked up, I had not heard of this person. I looked them up and I was like, yeah, I guess that tracks with their record. I think she was like arrested for like pointing a gun at a citizen or something
Let's
like
fucking
that.
go.
Yeah.
This is a city council member?
Yeah,
I'm like, is this for Staten Island? Like,
I think it is. Or it's like
this isn't the woman who bit someone, is it?
hell yeah.
No, it's not her. It's not her.
Okay.
But I remember
Councilman
reading
Rottweiler.
I love New York, man.
But I mean, I think what we've tried to do strategically is figure out who is in charge of this, right? It's the mayor, it's the mayor's office, and the city council. And so as of now, those have been our kind of 2, targets and efforts, if you will. But we've also started to strategize around who else has power, right, that can pull in different directions. And so we've started to think about, okay, who's on the boards, right? It's millionaires and billionaires. And so how do we get some regular folks, some patrons, some library workers, like, people that are not in the 1% who can kind of participate in those. And we've also started to entertain and think about, I think last week at the assembly, someone floated the idea, and I think it's great, of like coalition work, right? Like, could we team up with those climate change advocates around, if we're talking about cooling and heating and energy efficiency and stuff like that? Or could we link up with parks, because they also were promised, and I think they were not, handed what they asked for. And so, yeah, boards, coalitions, I think those are kind of things that are on the horizon for us to explore more and see what's possible, pulling on those levers, so to speak.
Another direction that I have been thinking about that I think would be useful is pushing even more on schools, whether it's PTAs and parents or whether it's like teachers unions, and trying to tie connections between like libraries help the work of education, and a fully funded library supports students in being able to do what they're in school for. A fully funded library is able to help kids do homework and print and learn to read and do math and like experience STEM programs and stuff like that. So I feel like pushing more on the links with education also makes sense.
Yeah, because like I was gonna ask, since if people aren't, listeners aren't aware, like the New York City libraries, like Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan, like those are technically like not part of. It's not like other cities where the library is like a city department. It's like its own little thing. It does get city funding, but it's not technically.
Yeah, they precede the city of New York becoming one thing. So the libraries were created as their own like Gilded Age give back schemes as
Yeah,
nonprofits during the Gilded Age, and then they came under the purview of the city because they get most of their funding from the city. They are city funded
right.
institutions, but
Okay.
they are technically nonprofits, and that the people who work for them are city workers, and they get
Oh, they
city
are?
worker.
Okay.
Yeah, they get city worker health benefits and stuff, but the libraries themselves are technically nonprofits, which I think has to like that is why there's the weird board of trustees for NYPL, where all of the rich people get together in a room and talk about how AI can replace librarians or whatever. Those meetings are public and you are allowed to go and sit there. You can't talk, but if you wanted to go and sit and stare at them, you could. A colleague has been trying to make the recorded meetings more scrutinized because the trustees often don't know what they're talking about. But I think that that's because it's not technically a city institution, that's how it's run. I don't know.
Boston's is the same way, and it is a city department, and it's a bunch
Yeah.
of millionaires. So
Yeah.
I think that's just what big cities do, which is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I was like, I didn't know if because I know like in other city libraries, it's like if the city workers are unionized, like the public school teachers and the library workers, they might not be in the same union, but they're like sister
Yeah.
union because they're all like city workers. So I just didn't know how that had affected this fight or the budget numbers or anything.
And the library unions ended up with the city unions in 1968 because of like the wave of strikes and everything. Like they got sort of swooped under the wing of the
Okay.
city unions. There had been a union before in NYPL in the 30s and 40s, and then it got crushed because of anti-communism, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they didn't have one until the 60s, and then I think just because of the conditions of the wave of strikes that hit, they wanted to make sure, I think, that library workers were sort of bound by the same no strike clauses as the other city workers, probably. And I
Yeah.
think that was probably one of the reasons why they ended up in the union with city workers.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's not good, but
Yeah.
that makes sense. I didn't know how that had affected y'all.
I am curious. I don't normally get into like the electoralism of it too much, but you did mention how the mayor has the ability to kind of send in a lowball budget and then everything is clawing back. So like how much authority does the mayor have to just like set the budget? Is it similar to like how the president submits a budget and it's just a wish list and then other people and then Congress actually has to write it? Or does the mayor actually have a little more power than that to like set the baseline of the budget?
My understanding is they have to agree. The council and the mayor have to agree on the budget for it to become an adopted budget. And they do have to do it in order to fund the institution. So they can go a little bit over, but they really have to do it by July. So the council does have power over how much ground they give. It's going to be a question of a whole bunch of different institutions that they're trying to find funding for things that like COVID funding for has lapsed or whatever. And so it's like the mayor is trying to use this low ball as pressure on the state to give the city more money. By the low ball, it's kind of like all of these things will be lost if we don't get money from the state. And I think most mayors, and I think Zoran is in this camp, I think they are not actually willing to see those massive cuts go through because it is a PR problem if they do go through. Eric Adams became more unpopular after this, after the cuts. But I think that mayors also have a whole city's budget in front of them. And I think the logic of austerity has been in operation so long that I mean, I was shocked by it. I was like furious with Zoran Mamdani because I spent so many hours of my life last spring, like knocking on doors and being like, I'm a librarian. Zoran supports libraries. Did you know that he's promised 0.5% of the city budget for libraries? And I'm like, you made me a liar, Zoran. I really like all of your policies. If you can implement them, I would like that. But also, like, there's the thing of like there is this budget shortfall. It's not the most historic budget shortfall in the world, but it's still something that they have to solve. So it's going to be about pressuring Hochul to fund the city so that the city can fund its institutions. But I do think that the position of the council members on whether libraries get funded or not will hold sway. Like if they care more about something, they are more likely to not sacrifice that thing versus something else. So if this is on their minds, it's good.
Mm.
Yeah, how much of a raise are the cops still getting?
Oh, I mean, if we're 0.5% of the city budget, they're like, I think
they're 12. I already looked it up.
Theirs going up though. Yeah. Is it the same amount that yours is going down? Probably.
Well, plus they always go over
more than the budget
budget.
shortfall. If they eliminated the cops, we would be crazy. Everything would be golden.
Utopia. Imagine that.
You can just swap their budget for 1 year. Plus, they can go over their budget because of all the misconduct lawsuits as well, which runs into over. Plus, they have to they can under budget for the overtime.
Yeah.
So it just eats everything else. Actually, 12% is kind of low for a city. Most small cities, it's 30 to 50% of your budget goes to the cops.
Really?
Oh wow.
Yeah. If you're like a regular city, like Houston or whatever, it might be like 25 or something, but small town might be like 30 to 50.
Mm.
It's kind of all your local city does is grow cops like some sort of mold.
That's just all the money. It just goes to cops.
That is talking about other cities. That reminds me. So when I testified, I went and looked up the library percentages for a couple other cities just because I was curious of how New York compares. And Chicago is at 0.7%. San Francisco is 1.3%, and LA is 1.9%.
Wow.
Yeah, which I did that math. I was like a few times. I was like, really? Like that seems, but there's obviously they're smaller cities than New York, even though they're still very big for the country. So they have very different budgets, both the city budget and library budgets. But I was like, if they can get those percentages, we should be able to get 0.5.
Yeah. So Tampa, it's 41% of the city budget goes to policing. Vera.org put out a publication of what policing costs in different cities. I think it would be nice to make an interactive map like that. I can actually put the link in the chat if you want to play around with it while we're talking. But I saw a lot of these coming around during like George Floyd and during other moments of like Black Lives Matter and policing abolition discussions of just making maps like this. And so it might be an interesting exercise to go to your city and see what percentage of your budget goes to libraries and making an interactive map like that and just saying
Boston is only 16%.
Yeah. Well, because Boston's so big, it shrinks down the bigger the city is. So smaller cities, it's like 50%, and then it's kind of shrinks as it gets smaller. But like Houston is still like 36, Austin's still 40. Like it's massive in those cities.
Wow.
But yeah, the bigger your city gets, the kind of smaller the percentage gets. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I love the idea that you said of making one of these for the library. I think that could be really interesting.
It's probably a lot more difficult because libraries are so weirdly funded. Like there's always like levies and county stuff. So I'm sure it's a lot harder. But at least if you could get big metropolitan cities like Chicago, LA, Miami, maybe, but it would be a little easier. Jacksonville, because Jacksonville is just one big city ever since home rule. I only know city history in Florida because I don't really know about it in other states. But they just made one giant county back in the 60s.
Another fact I know about revenue for libraries is 1.7% of Ohio's total general revenue fund goes to libraries. Ohio's, and I learned this because I went to the Columbus Library Book Fair as like a visiting author when my last book came out, and I was there, and there was 200 authors there, all being paid to go to the Columbus Library to give talks and panels and stuff. And it was all done on the library's budget. There was no special. I mean, maybe there were special grants, but it was like they were like, "We're going to do this every year," and it's because they have consistent revenue stream, and I think that's because of like maybe like aerospace manufacturing and stuff in Ohio, like airplanes and heavy manufacturing and stuff. So there's revenue from just like the economy of the state. Like it goes directly into like a public library fund that's used for public libraries. So Ohio's libraries are surprisingly amazing. Sorry for the surprisingly if you're from Ohio, but I didn't know.
No, Ohio sucks. Yeah. I did go to IFLA back in 2016 or something when it was in Columbus, but that's surprising. Usually, like quote unquote red states usually don't maybe have the best support for libraries, but that's
your inner Illinois is showing.
What? Oh, because
you're just so fast to say Ohio sucks.
I mean, it does. I was born there. I'm allowed to say it.
How have you felt about NYC Plan recently in terms of like, do you feel like you're gaining momentum, stagnating? Like, how does it feel like it's going as of like the day of recording? Like, how do you feel? Like you just came off another big meeting.
I think it will come down to what we are doing in the next couple months, right? Because this is the budget deliberation period. So if we want this effect to it, who knows what will happen this budget cycle, but if we want to affect this budget cycle, it'll be in the next few weeks. So something I personally am trying to figure out how to do is like in my neighborhood as a patron, I'm like figuring out if the Friends of the Library organization still meets or still is existing. They've funded things before. They fund a book sale every year. And if not, there's like a commons space in my neighborhood. And I'm kind of hoping that I can figure out a way to do like a postcard writing campaign to council members or something and then get people to turn out for it. We'll see. Like there's more budget negotiations to happen. So pressure during this time, like maybe calling council members en masse or getting a whole bunch of people from an organization to turn out at a park and talk to people about libraries. That kind of thing is going to have the effect it's going to have in the next few weeks.
I'm very curious to see how the next month or so is going to go. I do feel like, I'm not so interested in scaling as a metric for, success necessarily or anything. But when I do think of, okay, last year, how many people we had kind of showing up and, saying our message and whatnot. And then this year, we already have more people from, members of NYC Plan participating in that, that's one way to participate in the, process. But I do think that having more folks that are kind of saying what we need to say gives me some hope there. I know that, our newsletter now has over 2,000 people on it. And one of the people, I don't work on the newsletter or any of that stuff, but I heard from someone that they were looking at it and we have a really high open rate of the email. They were saying they're like, marketing executives would be so impressed. Like not everyone, but like, pretty close. A lot of everyone that's getting that email, they're opening it and they're, maybe hopefully reading it, which is hopeful.
Digital outreach is so tricky these days. I mean, there's no guaranteed approach. Like kind of seem to be going back to email, but because social media is kind of not really where it's at, and that's even more fragmented, particularly generationally. Like a lot of people are on Instagram, a lot of people are on Facebook. Where do you find people anymore? And Twitter's just a mess. So like, what do you do? Right. So I'm glad to hear that just good old fashioned emailing is working.
I think so.
On that note, like how can people get involved? You mentioned there's lots of ways of getting involved. So like, if someone's listening right now and says, "Oh, I want to get involved," like what are some things I can do?
So, one thing for sure is to email your city council member if you're in New York City. And of course, this is kind of translatable into other settings as well. So, you'll have to kind of see who your people are in your settings. But for sure, we have an action network. It's on our website, nycplan.org. It's linked there. But in general, we're encouraging people to email, to call their city council members and ask them, will you support 0.5% for libraries? And also even encouraging them to meet with their, council member and if you're someone from their, staff, perhaps they have a budget person or whatnot. And having those conversations, I think, is kind of the biggest thing. But then also as we, go through this budget cycle in the next couple months, we are anticipating there being a city council hearing in May. That's when it was last year. That is folks from the libraries and folks from the finance team. And we encourage people to testify. You can testify in person, you can testify over Zoom, and you can just submit written testimony if you are unavailable that day. So there's information about all of that on our website, but those are kind of the big things. And if you are in New York, we meet one Sunday a month, and it goes back and forth between on Zoom or in person. And, we need more people. We always need more people on these things. So we invite people to come on out.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the links can be added to the show notes. info@nycplan.org is email you can contact to receive the agenda of the next meeting if you are interested. I think the next one is on Zoom, and I think it's on the 19th of April.
I found out about y'all because my union sent me to the October assembly, and I thought it was really cool. And I was wondering if y'all could talk about because we've been through this. Oh, you've been having assembly, but it's can y'all maybe talk more about these people's assemblies that you have had, and what was the sort of rationale behind going that route of having assemblies? What's it been organizing them, getting people to show up to them, all of that?
I mean, I think that it's kind of this format of a large egalitarian conversation where there are speakers and there is sitting and listening, but there is also breakout groups where everyone in the room is encouraged to talk to each other. And I think rather than just an outdoor rally where people may not engage with other people that they didn't come with, I think this format is a large scale organizing practice to try to get people thinking and talking and activated, that also provides sort of space and care for them to be activated. For example, there was lunch provided at the one that we just had. So I think it's the logic of if we can just get everyone in a big enough room, we can have good ideas, and then everyone goes away knowing more people and feeling like they're part of more of a movement than if they come and listen and leave, or if they come and yell at something and leave. I think rallies are still important, and I hope that we can have some big library rallies, either with, the libraries organizing. They often have library rallies this time of year, or union presence, or an NYC Plan one. But I think that this kind of the assemblies as organizing format, I mean, it's coming kind of from an anarchist principle, sort of.
Mhm.
There's someone who's running the show, but everyone is encouraged to speak up. And I see people sort of coming out of their shell and interested. There was a woman who worked at Make the Road who was, when she was asked about what she valued in the public library, she had some stories to tell, and she was just there because she worked at Make the Road, but she was sort of also wrapped into the conversation because she was there.
Yeah, I think Z is exactly right there. And one thing that I've really gotten a lot out of at this assemblies are the panels that we've put together. And the
Mhm.
panels are intentionally across party, I guess, conversations. So at each of them, we've had, yes, a union president, and we've had a library worker, and we've had a patron. And then at two of them, we've had a city council member. We had Lincoln Ressler and Christopher Marte come out to two of them. And so we're trying to kind of bring different perspectives together to see, what we can figure out if we all kind of share the positions we can come from. And what I really appreciated about when Christopher Marte came to our assembly is that it felt like he was giving us some tips a little bit, some like insider knowledge where he said, okay, one thing for you to be aware of is like city council, we XYZ. And so it was helpful to kind of get those ideas. But like Hal said, I think the real strength of them is exactly that, is like that social connectivity that is so necessary for kind of movement work. You have to have, even if you don't have to be friends or best friends with people, but there has to be some ties that bring you back in a way. And I think the assembly is a really great way to show up and kind of get a feel of like the conversations and the concerns of, the group without it feeling, our meetings are working meetings. We're in motion. The train is going. And so I think when I first joined, I was like, okay, trying to get my, my footing. So that can be a little like daunting, but the assembly is like really, I find a very accessible entry point for people.
Yeah, I remember. I think the patron at the Manhattan one was also
A young person.
yeah, like a young person. Like I don't know if they were even yet a teenager yet,
Yeah.
or they were
Mhm.
just a very young teenager. But it was like really powerful to like hear their perspective alongside like the library workers' perspective. Like for example, like I really I think that was like my favorite part of that whole day was that panel. Um,
Yeah.
just because it was so great hearing everybody.
Kind of going back to what you said earlier, Hal, about possibility for collaborating with schools, that makes me think about, this is a little bit of an aside, but I feel like I really want to share it with you all, is that New York City public schools have not completely, but very much so lost their libraries in the last 15 years. And so even though I looked up the numbers earlier, even though there's about 1,600 public schools in New York City, there's only 270-ish full-time librarians. And part of that was, yeah. And 1,000 of those schools have a library. So the schools have the infrastructure for libraries, but there are no library workers or
Yeah.
librarians, I guess they would be called. And that came from under the Bloomberg administration. There was a school initiative to, you know, in New York City, the school buildings are huge, right? Like very, very big buildings. And so they had this initiative to help improve graduation rates to split schools up into smaller schools. So instead of having a building with like a school of 3,000 kids, let's split it into like 3 schools kind of and whatnot. And whether that's good or bad, I think it did ultimately help the graduation rate. That's great. However, if you have less kids in a school, you have less pupils, you have less pupil per pupil funding. And if you have less funding, then you can't pay for the extra, quote, quote,
Yeah.
extra folks, right? And so that means art, PE, music, librarians, all of that. Principals have to make some, decisions of like, do I have a librarian or do I have music? And usually they are going to pick art and music over a librarian. So I'm not super active with them, but there's a campaign called Librarians Equal Literacy, and they have been really working on this to try and get more librarians back into New York City public schools. But it's a real bummer and a big room for improvement there too.
Yeah. And this is like, even in Midtown, where there's a lot of relatively rich kids, there was a local elementary school that didn't have a library. And there was a group of parents who were taking turns volunteering there after school with like their collection of donated books that like a parent had come up with for their library or whatever to do like check out at the library after school. And so like in a very involved school with lots of involved parents, you can get something like that where they sort of bring back from the dead some version of a checkout library, but they're not trained library staff. They can't do it all the time. And I'm sure that teachers have classroom collections and, they're reading in class as much as they can, but it's not the same. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, it's a real bandage on the problem, and everyone's like, "Oh, see, it's working, isn't it?" But it's not working. That's kind of worse than it not working. Is you're just watching people kind of spread themselves too thin and work too hard.
And literacy rates are not great like kids are experiencing reading delays, and some part of that is like social media, some part of that is still COVID delay because kids missed a lot of classroom time and a lot of reading time and did a lot of like learning how to navigate a screen rather than learning how to navigate books, which is like they're navigating screens all the time, but they're not necessarily building the long form text reading skills that they'll need to build critical analyses as they're like starting to do research projects or get older and like encounter more information about the world online. We need libraries because we need critical reading skills. If we want an informed public who can make decisions about important things in the future, like climate change, that every kid today is going to be living with, they need to be able to read about science.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there definitely is going to have to be a renewed, insistence on just early literacy training, something that people have seems kind of fallen behind. You read studies about like, do millennial parents read to their kids, and like how high do they rank that importance, and how much do they enjoy doing it? And it's just a cratered.
Yeah.
So I think there's got to be like a new sort of like read to your kids PSA campaign going on to reverse some of this, because it's pretty shocking how bad the drop off has been.
I think there might be one. It's like, I don't know the number, like 1,000,000 words by kindergarten or something, where it's trying to get, it's just like about, 1,000,000 word gap or something, where they're trying to, again, just do exactly that, promote that, like, you have to read so that your kids hear 1,000,000 words by kindergarten, and that's going to set them up to be, strong literacy skills and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I haven't heard about it in a while. Might be old.
I think teach to test kind of stuff is really cutting out how much silent reading time is built into a child's day at school, which in turn cuts into how much they enjoy reading on their own time. Because if you have a sort of free period for reading as part of the school day and you get to select your own material, it's a great assertion of agency. And then also it's a great sort of private learning experience that a child learns to have fun with if that's built into the day more. But if you have to teach to standardized testing by grade 4, then you can't spend as much time allowing kids to sort of develop reading enjoyment at their own pace. You have to push them through hoops to get them there.
And we're in a really conservative swing around reading right now, because there was, quote, quote, balanced literacy was kind of like the in vogue teaching strategies, which had that sort of independent reading time and whatnot. But then there was kind of like a big shakeup during COVID when a lot of families realized like, oh, they're getting, independent reading time or whatever. And that's great. That's wonderful. But they also were not getting phonics instruction, and all kids learn differently. So for some kids, that was not a big deal. They could become literate without the phonics instruction as explicitly. But some kids absolutely need that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that podcast Sold a Story. And so then there's like this big swing, and now schools are, especially in New York, are really leaning into quote quote the science of reading. And so there's a very strong emphasis on phonics and passages, and that's all related to Common Core, No Child Left Behind, which is legacy of Reagan and A Nation at Risk. Like it's like all interrelated in ways that literacy people know much more about than I do. But it does mean that a lot of kids are not getting that joyful reading time in school that they really need. And librarians would help with that.
We have the books.
Yeah, and just being able to open the library too, like open your library and be able to like have students go in there.
I guess I had one final question. I don't know what other questions Justin might also have. So NYC Plan largely focused on this like big budget ask, right? Say that happens, or say it doesn't, you're still fighting, but like what other sort of like adjacent causes around libraries would NYC Plan maybe think about organizing around? Like I'm thinking particularly right now about like what do we do about ICE in our libraries and like protecting patrons and their families and employees and their families. And so it's like what kinds, like has that been on NYC Plan's radar, or anything like that?
So there was a Know Your Rights training about how to spot ICE agents at the meeting that we had on the 21st. I think that right now ICE agents haven't been targeting libraries. As far as I know, in New York, most of the abductions that I think are happening at like 7 a.m. as people are leaving for work, and then at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon. That's when I see rapid response groups light up a little bit, and they're often happening in the Bronx or deep in Queens and working class neighborhoods. And we've had the libraries have had like their formal legal counsel instructions on what to do if there's ICE agents in there for a while. The ones that I encountered at NYPL were disappointing because they were like, you
Yeah.
can't instruct anybody to go into a private area because then you're hindering the pursuit of illegal aliens or whatever.
Hmm.
So they can't tell you to do something that's going to be a liability for the library. But I do think that a group like NYC Plan could also partner with immigrant rights groups. I think that one would need to try to not put a target on the back of those groups because immigrants use libraries a lot. And
Yeah.
I think that to be like all of the immigrants are in the libraries at a time when there's a huge
Yeah.
crackdown on immigrants happening. Yeah, but we can continue to try to thread together the concerns of we want a just society with access to information, and we want everyone to be free and safe in that society. And so continuing rapid response kind of knowledge sharing within the organization too makes sense. I think for future causes for NYC Plan, if we don't get the 0.5% this go round, hammering on like summer air conditioning is probably a big one, or like keeping libraries
Mm-hmm.
open and cool during the summer so that people can cool down. I do think also like if ICE cracks down on New York City, I think being like libraries should be a no cop, no ICE kind of zone would be a campaign that could be done. And then I think like other than that, it's just there's a bunch of libraries that are closed for renovations that have been closed for endlessly delayed renovations for a long time. So I think putting pressure on to get that taken care of would be another point of emphasis locally.
What Hal said.
Well, is there any final plugs you want to do for yourselves or for NYC Plan before we wrap up?
I've been applying at the Brooklyn Library since last July. So if you work at the Brooklyn Library and you're hooked up to HR, hit me up. I have young adult novels that if you want to check out, they are NYC libraries and some other libraries too. They're out of Salem, which is about a zombie and a werewolf in Salem, Oregon, and there's How to Get Over the End of the World, which is about 3 queer teenagers saving their queer youth group using a rock opera gala. And there's Fawn's Blood, which is a vampire novel about a trans girl who runs away to try to find her friend who she thinks faked his death to become a vampire. So if you are interested in young adult fiction, that's a totally off the wall thing. But those are my books.
Hell yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to have to check them out. My first book is coming out in the fall. I wasn't planning to talk about it, but I'll mention it. Why not? It's From Anti-Racism to Abolition, Professional Learning for Liberating Schools. It's for educators, school leader audience, about how we can use teacher professional development time more strategically to work towards, as we said, liberating schools, justice, racial justice explicitly, all of that good stuff.
Hell yeah. We love that.
Yeah.
Great. I'll put all that in the show notes.
Thank you guys
Thanks
so
for having
much.
us.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Of course. No, what a lovely conversation.
Good night.